10 minutes, I have to talk about trust in the digital era, and I think it's I've kind of was warmed up by a couple of the speakers here this morning with regards to different aspects of what it means to have trust in this digital era. I'll try to, in a minute or so, talk to you about my own perspective about how the heck did we get here in the first place in the last 20 years. So I don't know if you remember, but somewhere back in the 90s, connectivity cost money. You actually needed to pay in order to pass data from one place to another. It was an issue. But then all these technologies, and some that we're talking about today, mobile phones, GPS, packet switching, the internet, all matured in the same time. They were actually not developed for the public to use or for commercial uses. A lot of them came from military labs, and all of a sudden they matured, and boom, we had connectivity for everyone. Then around 2007, if you remember, this is quite a new machine. The smartphone came out, the cloud came out, Wi-Fi came out, and all of a sudden we moved from connectivity to hyperconnectivity, right? And if you think about where we are today with what I call cross-connectivity, so OT is merging with IT, and IT is merging with IoT, and our bodies are connected to the internet in different ways, and this is just the beginning, and it's accelerating dramatically. On top of all that, you add what we call AI, or machines making quasi-cognitive decisions for us. That's how we got here. And in many ways, what happened in 2007, apropos intelligence and intelligence agencies, is that the attackers followed this hyperconnectivity curve for a very simple reason. If you're an attacker, one good thing is that you have many opportunities. And as everyone, everybody, everything got connected, and we got hyper-connected, what we call the attack surface blew up. And when the attack surface blows up, there's just many more opportunities for attackers. Now, defenders also improved, but not at the same pace. And so we opened this gap. And this gap is why the cybersecurity industry is so successful, and is why Israel is riding that wave. But it's a serious gap, and I think we should be doing something about it, because if you think about that risk versus opportunity, right? So from a risk versus opportunity, we're sort of between paradigms. In our cybersecurity business, we're still in many ways trying to fix the fact that over these last 20 years, the pace of change and acceleration that moves us from connectivity to hyperconnectivity to cross-connectivity, we didn't really think about the implications. And so where we are today is that on the one side, in terms of privacy, we're in a real dire situation. And I think for the first I think there's a backlash about privacy, right? I mean, if I would have given this talk about 10 years ago, I'd tell you, look, the millennials, they don't care about privacy. All they care about is convenience, and they can't have a meal without posting it on Facebook, and so they don't care about privacy. Forget it, privacy is dead. That's not the case, really. I think there's a backlash. I think we're starting to understand that that's unacceptable in many, many ways. Not everything is private, but as human beings, we do want something to be private. So maybe it's switched, right? I grew up in a generation where everything was private unless you decided to publicize it, and now we live in a generation where maybe it's the opposite, but at least we want to have something on the privacy side. And then think about trust. So this is kind of a shocking anecdote, right? Using AI, if I record anybody in the crowd here for 3.7 seconds or more, I can now impersonate you so the human ear will not differentiate between my machine talking or you talking. Now let's talk about trust. So all these things are in serious attack, and when we think about privacy and trust, and if we think about some of the attacks that we've seen in the last couple of years on utilities, critical infrastructure, our social security numbers, etc., That's a real issue, right? Now, obviously, when you take really big data and you clean it up a little and you make it accessible to really smart machines, there's an immense opportunity. So if you think about digital health, for example. So, this is just one example, right? Breast cancer is probably one of the worst killers or one of the worst diseases that of our times. The best pathologists, doctors that look at a scan have about a 62% chance of identifying very early stage of metastasizing cancer in certain breast cancers, while machines can do it in 99% accuracy. That's not bad. That spread there can save millions of lives. So that's a great opportunity. You think about mobility, right? One of the things that we're proud of as Israelis is our mobility industry. About 1.5 million people a year die in car accidents. Not injured, dead. Right? There are other millions that their lives will never be the same, or their families. It's probably one of the it's one of the biggest contributors, if not the biggest contributors to global warming. Put together big data and AI, electrified autonomous cars could save millions of lives and slow down global warming. So this is sort of what we're talking about, right? And I think, and that's what I'm passionate about, that where big data meets AI, cyber is becoming more and more important. And I think we have an opportunity between those paradigms to change what it means to do cyber. And so I want to give you 3 examples of thinking differently, or what we call Rethink Cyber at Team 8 about cyber. So one, you have to be proactive, right? So you've probably heard before, right? The attacker only needs to be right once. On defense, we have to be right 100% of the time. And hence, this is an asymmetric situation, and we're bound to lose, which is true. Except that you can think differently. You can be proactive about it. So one thing that we do with elusive networks is we say, you know what? We know how attackers think. Let's go into the network. Let's map the network not from IT's perspective, but from the attacker's perspective. And then, you're right, we don't know where the attack is, when it's going to come. We don't know who is going to go on the attack. But we know where it's going to happen. It's going to happen in our network, and we know our network better than the attacker. So why not think about how the attacker moves within the network, map those lines beforehand, and create deceptions throughout the whole network so that when the attacker comes in, this is a very hostile environment for the attacker. Now every time they make a move, they have to choose what's right and what's wrong, what's good, what's bad. And now we just flip the asymmetry. The attacker has to be right every time he moves within our network. So that's being proactive, right? Think about being productive. How many of you work in an enterprise? Like you're not self-employed. Kלכליסט counts as well, right? HFN does as well, right? Whatever. How many of you that work for some kind of enterprise are really happy with your connectivity capabilities? That is, whenever you want to connect to any site, whenever you want to download anything, whenever a client sends you a file, everything, boom, happens really good and you're really happy about it. Raise your hand. There's one person in the room. I'll talk to you later. I want to work for your employer. So, one of the problems is that we understand that there is a threat out there, and so if somebody in your bank or in your newspaper or whoever else is blocking these things and making you less productive, it's not because they don't like innovation, or they don't want you to be productive, or they don't want you to win. It's because they're balancing this act between being productive and being secure. And so we said, who said that you have to work on one operating system? Right? And this is what we do with Isolate. We take one machine, we take advantage of the fact that these machines are much faster, have much more storage, have much more, their compute power is immensely greater, to launch 3 operating systems on the same machine. So now you know what? You're welcome to attack my machine, except that you're going to be probably infiltrating the operating system that doesn't have anything private on it. And my other operating system, I'm going to use to do the more sensitive stuff. And now I can use one machine, but we all have multiple personas. And the last thing that I want to talk to you about is be inventive, and that goes back to encryption. I actually think encryption is great. Yes, there's always two sides to everything that we do, but without encryption, many of the inventions that the world runs on are completely impossible, right? E-commerce, there is no e-commerce without encryption. We also have, as Israelis, a couple of inventors on the encryption side, and one of them, for example, is Professor Adi Shamir, who is the S from RSA. And without the S or the RSA, many of what we are doing today would have not happened, right? So encryption, again, has ups and downs. But one of the problems with encryption is that it's binary. Data is either encrypted or not. And so today, encryption is used when we're not using the data. So when we store it, we call it data in motion, or when we pass it around, we call it data in motion. At rest or in motion, sorry. Another Israeli professor, Professor Shafi Goldwasser, invented, or didn't invent, but researched, and actually got a Turing Prize for her research, invented homomorphic encryption. And with homomorphic encryption, what we can do is move away from believing that things are black or white, either encrypted or not. So you can actually take the data, encrypt it, and still compute unencrypted data. Hence, you don't have to make that choice, do I trust or not? Tying that back into breast cancer, if I want to give somebody that promises me that they have the best compute capability or model in the world, all they need is my genomic data. Now I really have to trust them. So many researchers so some research at least does not happen because of this privacy trust conundrum. But if we can encrypt the data and still compute on it, we don't have to make that choice. So to wrap up, this privacy and trust is becoming a really big issue. And if we don't solve it, we're not going to have those incredible inventions that really, really have an ability to move us as a humanity forward. And that's the stuff that I believe we should be working on. And I think Israel has a lot to offer by bringing cyber, not just as an afterthought, but as a part of the future design of our infrastructure. Thank you very much.